Things that I want to talk to you about: what Absolute Tissue Bank does, a bit about how we support research using human organs and tissues that can't be used for therapeutic use, and the impact that we have felt as a research tissue bank from the Human Tissue Act 2004 and obviously the regulatory body, the Human Tissue Authority. So a bit about us first as a research tissue bank. Who are we? What do we do? We supply human tissue to support biomedical research within a very ethical, transparent and legal framework. And by that I mean we have all the right Research Ethics Committee approvals in place. We've gone through all the relevant legislation and made sure that we've ticked every single box. We hope we offer an alternative, another choice to donor families if an organ can't be used for transplantation. We hope we can validate some research methods using human tissues. There may be, and I know there are certainly people in the audience who know that there are reams and reams and reams of papers detailing methods for the use of animal tissues, animal cells in research. But try looking up the same thing for using human tissue, and I'm sure David and Bob will back me up and tell me that if you do the equivalent of a Google search, you wouldn't find very many. Oh, they're nodding. That's good. And whilst we're not people in balaclava standing outside Sainsbury's on a Saturday afternoon, the animal rights people, we do hope that we contribute to the reduction, the refinement and the replacement of the use of animals in research. So where does tissue for research come from? Human tissue. Two sources: living donors, patients having an operation where tissue is removed during the course of a surgical treatment. For example, somebody with a liver cancer, and the surgeon will remove a normal margin of tissue from around the cancer that they remove to make sure that they've got all the cancer removed. And that normal tissue would usually be discarded as waste by the pathologist. With arrangements put in place between the hospital and the ethics committee, we can use that normal tissue and bring it into our laboratories and process it and send it out to researchers. And there has been no impact on those sorts of arrangements at all since the Human Tissue Act 2004 came into place. No impact whatsoever. That's the really good news. Deceased donors, whether that be deceased cardiac death donors that you've been hearing about, or brainstem dead, heart-beating donors, massive impact on the use of organs for research from these donors since the introduction of the Human Tissue Act 2004. In the case of organs retrieved for transplantation, but at some later stage found unsuitable for transplantation, with appropriate consent from the appropriate family, there's no problem at all using these organs for research. What you cannot do is retrieve purely for research without the appropriate licence being put in place. And Victoria touched on that in the talk that she did, and I'm going to expand a little bit on that. How has it specifically impacted on research? This is how it's impacted, because there are tissues now we're unable to access purely for research that scientists had previously shown a massive uptake in. So in red, organ that we now cannot receive at all purely for research purposes. We just cannot access lung tissue because the appropriate licenses are not in place in enough hospitals to allow us to be able to access this tissue. So researchers approach us and say, "Can I have lung tissue, please?" And we have to say, "I'm really sorry, we're unable to access it." So there are an awful lot of different types of biomedical research that can no longer access this type of tissue for very specific types of research. most of which will go into making new medicines, new treatments, new ways of diagnosing quite significant disease processes that affect us all as members of the public. I feel that some of this has already been explained in depth by Victoria, so I don't really want to go over old ground. But the crux of this is the licensing issue with retrieval of material from the deceased to be used in a scheduled purpose, i.e. research. So a donor in an intensive care unit without an appropriate licence being in place on the premises, donation for research cannot go ahead. And the main issues here are the extension of the existing pathology licence. And one of the big issues there is you can only extend a licence into the hospital that is named on the pathology licence. And my local trust, I come from the West Midlands, my local trust has 3 hospitals: Solihull, Good Hope and Heartlands. And the licensed premises is Heartlands. But that's not where most of the donors are. Most of the donors are in Good Hope because that has the biggest A&E catchment area. The biggest number of patients would go to that hospital because of the population numbers. But we can't license that hospital under the existing scheme because the trust would have to pay £2,000 to do that. There's also the issue that even if a hospital applies to extend their licence, at present there's no acknowledgement made of that application. And so we were talking to Victoria during the break, the lady from the Human Tissue Authority, to put these sorts of issues to her and see how she might be able to help us. And we hope we might have some really good news moving forward on that, and we'll perhaps have to wait until May. But it looks like we might be able to move forward and not solve all of the issues, but certainly go some way towards moving towards a positive outcome to be able to support biomedical research. Because this affects not just NHS research, not just academic research, but also researchers in the commercial sector, who are often those that financially support NHS and academic researchers. So it's a massive impact. One thing we've found is that British researchers are having to source tissues from outside of the UK. This is a promotion we picked up from a commercial tissue bank in America. I think it's quite an American thing, really. But it shows the sort of marketing that an American commercial tissue bank might make. This is one that was put out. It came to us in an email because we've managed to get on the mailing list of a British competitor. This is something that was put out beginning of March, and we declined to take them up on the offer, but this is again the sort of marketing that goes on. British Pharma are also moving outside of the UK, and I don't know whether David will mention, I'm sure he will, that they've had to set up a satellite laboratory outside of the UK. In some cases, researchers had to be halted because access to tissue is just impossible. And so great plans to do some groundbreaking, what might turn out to be groundbreaking research, have just had to be halted. And one of the things that started to tick in my mind was about the loss to British economy in terms of income generation. the wider issue, taking it way outside the walls, the four walls of a laboratory. I wanted to leave you with not depressing news, but the hard reality of what is being faced by researchers in the UK at present. There has been a huge impact, and that impact has been felt throughout the research sector, whether that's NHS, whether it's academics, or whether it is commercial researchers, with an incalculable effect on the economy. And at present, solutions are really difficult to find, but I am encouraged by having had this conversation with Victoria just over coffee that we may be moving into what we hope is very positive waters. That's me keeping it really, really brief, and thank you so much for paying attention.